Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to CIO Leadership Live. I'm Mary Fran Johnson, Executive Director of CIO Programs here at IDG, and I'm very pleased to have as our guest today Douglas Blackwell, who is the CIO of Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey. Doug has been the Senior Vice President and CIO for Horizon, which is the largest health insurance company in the state of New Jersey. It has $13 billion in revenue and 3.8 million members in New Jersey. He works with the CEO and the senior leadership team, driving company strategy and executing on Horizon's current focus, which is something you'll recognize from what many healthcare companies and insurers are going through today, where they're moving from a traditional fee-for-service model more to one of a fee-for-value. In addition to his leadership role in running IT, Doug is also leading the company's digital strategy. Before he joined Horizon, he held a number of senior IT positions in financial services, insurance, and the software business. So he really understands the intricacies of IT business relationships, and that's something we'll be getting into quite a bit. He has served as a senior VP for a division of the Allscripts Ellipsis Corporation and also for Service Operations IT. He led that up for Cigna Corp. His board experience includes membership on the board of advisors of Heritage Healthcare, the Innovation Fund based in Nashville, Tennessee, and he recently joined the board of directors of Zipari, a Brooklyn-based software firm which develops consumer solutions for the healthcare market. Welcome to the program, Doug.
Thank you.
It's delightful to have you here.
Great to be here.
All right, let's dive in and talk first about the size and the scope of Horizon's business and operations. We'll get into more specifics on the IT group itself, but I always, with the blues, with all of the Blue Cross Blue Shields across the country, it's a good idea to put everybody in perspective. So where does Horizon fit in the world of the blues?
So in terms of the blues, and I think there's about 36 blues, as we were talking about earlier, we are the fifth largest Blue Cross Blue Shield organization. I think we're somewhere in the top 10 in terms of healthcare insurance companies across the country. Obviously, we're competing with the big guys like a Cigna and Aetna who are larger, but I think we're still in the top 10 overall.
Yes.
3.8 million members, as you mentioned, and about $13 billion in revenue. We are a not-for-profit blues company. All blues kind of have different organization structures depending. But if you put us on the Fortune 500, if we were a public company, we'd be somewhere in the 200 to 240 range, somewhere in there. So a fairly sizable organization.
Sizable indeed.
About 6,000 employees. We have about 3,000 to 4,000 other resources. We'll talk about IT in a minute, but for instance, I have about 2,000 resources who support IT. Only 500 are employees. So those other 1,500 are partners, outsourced relationships, things like that.
Yeah, that's a lot of significant partnerships.
It is. In our product structure, we have all sorts of healthcare products, commercial insurance products. We're also a very large Medicaid player. We have about 900,000 Medicaid members. That's one of the largest Blue Cross Blue Shield Medicaid businesses across the country. We all have specialty areas, dental, vision. We're starting to expand that as a way to increase revenue, increase profitability. We are not for profit, but we do pay taxes. We pretty much operate like any for-profit business would. We pay federal taxes, we pay state taxes, but we're highly regulated both in the state and the federal area. But and we've been pretty successful. We're part of the on exchange, the Obamacare marketplace. We started that in 2013. We're one of the few blues that actually made money the first couple of years. A lot of companies and even the national guys lost their shirts on the exchanges, but we were fairly conservative going in and it worked out for us.
Yeah.
We have, I think, 200,000 members on the exchange today, something like that.
That's excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Well, and you mentioned kind of in passing, in IT you have about 500 employees. And let's talk about the IT operation itself. How do you have it structured and how has it changed in the last year or two?
Well, we kind of started with, I'll call it a traditional plan.
The classic.
Plan, build, run kind of a model. When I first got there back in 2011, kind of reorganized along those lines. And that worked out well. And I think going forward, we're going to make some changes. The entire organization is going to change a little bit. We have a new CEO, Kevin Conlon, who took over as of the first of this year. And he really wants to focus on a couple of things. One is what he calls transform and then perform.
Yeah.
So transforming really, where are we taking the business, where are we looking at going in the future, and then performing, making sure that what we're doing today, we're doing well. And the other part of it is the orientation towards really true profit loss, P&L responsibilities and accountabilities on the part of the different business areas. So those are going to drive changes in IT ultimately.
Yeah. Well, that must be kind of an interesting concept to end up talking to IT people about, because as you said, that traditional plan and build and run, all of those functions are still pretty key, right,
Sure,
to getting things done. So when you think about actually changing the structure, I always ask, does that mean more agile operations, more into DevOps? There doesn't seem to be any point when you can just say, well, let's not plan anymore. Let's not build anything. Let's not run anything. So how do you do that? How do you approach it?
I mean, agility, flexibility is certainly a key piece of this. Yeah, so we are looking at moving more towards an agile type development methodology, and we've actually done that in a couple of cases so far. We want to make that more sustainable, more standard. Develop a framework that we can kind of use to determine whether or not a project or an application is right for agile development. Not every project is. We'll still continue to traditional waterfall for some time to come, but where it does make sense, we'll absolutely move that way. And I think the business overall will also look at a more kind of agile process orientation as we kind of develop and change the culture a little bit going forward.
Well, that always strikes me as the way to tell whether Agile is really making a difference when the methodologies start spilling outside of IT. Because when you run it inside IT, it has to involve colleagues from the business.
Yeah, absolutely.
There has to be product managers. Are you doing, for instance, special training within IT to get people into that idea of being product managers instead of project managers?
Yeah, we're actually working on that right now, developing that training program and process, developing that framework that I mentioned. And I think the point about the business kind of ownership component of this is not to be taken lightly. Business guys a lot of times will love to give you a napkin from the cafeteria and say, here's the 3 things I need on my application, go do it.
Here's my requirements, good luck.
I'll see you in a couple of months.
And
Agile being a very iterative process, having business sitting at the table with you, being very close to what's going on. It's a commitment on the part of those guys, and we all need to kind of work together on it.
Yeah, you have to sit up and get their attention and say, not so fast.
Exactly.
We're going to need you in these meetings. And they'd be like, every one of them?
Exactly.
Yes, probably. Well, and thinking about the big shifts that are underway, we can't resist talking about it with healthcare organizations, because the consumer focus, even though healthcare has always been focused on patients, on helping people get better, now it's almost helping them more to stay well rather than just get better. And one of the things you said about when we talked earlier, you said we're trying to give consumers more information on where they want to even get their services. Tell me how that is rolling out for you.
So we're doing a lot of that through our new kind of digital platform, giving them better information on what the options are for them. So obviously from a health insurance company, we want to make sure that they're getting the best care possible, but we're also trying to make sure it's the most cost-effective care that they have. So going to an urgent care center, for instance, is a lot more cost-effective than going to the emergency room. And the emergency room tends to be the most expensive site of care across the board. So trying to get them kind of oriented differently. You'd be amazed at how many members have benefits that they don't take advantage of. Primary care physicians, just things that are actually paid for.
Don't know.
They don't. As much education as you can try to do, sometimes it just doesn't happen. So through digital technology, being able to provide that information in a much kind of easier to understand, more effective way that they can take advantage of is what we're trying to get to with the digital platform.
Right. What is the primary mobile app that is serving your members right now, and where is that in terms of the next upgrade or the capabilities you'd like to see it have?
Sure. So you mentioned I'm on the board of Zapari. And Zapari is a smaller company based out of Brooklyn. They're health only. They're health insurance focused only, or health care providers, or healthcare industry only. They came from the healthcare industry, and it's all about the digital platform. And they have kind of basic portal and app type services. It sits on top of something they call a customer experience engine, which is all artificial intelligence based. So think about some of the kind of the basic information you might want to get off a portal from a health insurance provider, your benefit information, your claims information, where can I find a doctor or a hospital to go to, where can I find a specialist. So they do all that, but they also provide things like next best action. So if I'm looking at a benefit, what would be the next thing I'd want to do after that? Well, maybe it's check that specialist, check your costs, see what it's going to be, your out-of-pocket expense is going to be, see what your deductible is, other things like that. And they'll offer that up kind of as a push to you as a consumer,
That's
as
very
opposed to
smart.
having to pull that from us.
Because it's getting increasingly tricky to figure out if whoever you're calling and going to see whether they're in network or out of network. And that's when you mentioned the cost. You gave me an example when we talked earlier about MRIs.
Yes.
And how those can differ. How much are we talking in terms of differences?
Thousands. I mean, you can get an
Thousands of
MRI for
dollars.
$1,000, you can get it for $5,000, depending, again, on the site of service or the location.
Yeah.
So again, trying to make sure that people are aware of that. And
Right.
as plans become more and more of the burden of the cost is put on the consumer, we want to make sure they're educated in their choices, because a lot of that, they'll end up bearing the cost.
Yeah.
We'll bear some of it, but they'll bear a lot of it as well.
Well, and it's one thing to talk about a mobile app, and anyone who's probably Gen X or millennials, they're very comfortable on the mobile app, but that doesn't mean you can get rid of anything else, does it? Because
No.
you've got a lot of older consumers who
Right.
might still not have iPhones,
Yes,
for
yeah.
instance.
Like my mother, for instance. I'll mention her. She refuses to use an iPhone or a computer.
She can just call you.
She can call me, and I'll take care of it. But yeah, absolutely. So it's really an omni-channel approach.
Okay.
And one of the things we're trying to do, and we'll talk probably in a minute about our kind of API technology that we've implemented, providing the same data to whatever the consumer of that data is. So the source of the data is the same, but our call centers consume that data through our CRM application. Our members consume the data through our apps. Our physicians and provider groups consume it through a different type of app and interface. So trying to get the same source is the key.
Well, and I can remember that being a discussion point. I've been around in the industry since the 90s, let's just say. And I can remember us talking years ago about getting to the one source of the truth. So that has been a very long road for a lot of IT organizations. How close are you at this point, or is it within reach because of the technologies available to us and things like AI and machine learning? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd say it's within reach, but it's certainly not done. As you say, it's a journey.
Nobody's putting a stake in the ground and saying we're there.
No, that won't happen for years probably.
Okay.
But I think kind of the openness of software today allows that more so than it did 20 years ago when things were much more closed.
Yeah.
Everybody had their own proprietary systems, whether it's IBM or Informatica or whoever it is for exchanging data. Today it's much more open, using open source and different ways to get there.
Yeah.
And the use of API technology again is something we think is important to move in that direction. And also master data management. Years ago, when they started talking about single sources of truth, that was kind of the genesis of all that. Very difficult to do. We've done it to a degree with certain components of data, but to do it across the board is both expensive and a difficult proposition.
Well, tell me a little bit about the size and structure of your current network. How many machines? How many networks? I mean, it's probably pretty massive. So how can you describe it?
Yeah, it's big. It's not enormous compared to some of the giants out there, but I think
It's not the Department of Defense.
Right, it's
but,
not the DoD,
yeah.
but
All right.
something like 12,000 end user devices, somewhere in the 3,000 to 5,000 server range, a couple of data centers, actually 2 main data centers and a third aux center. We do an awful lot of partnering, software as a service, and outsourcing.
Yes, you
so,
mentioned.
for instance, you mentioned on the board of Zapari. I'm also on the board of a company called NASCO. NASCO is a Blues-owned entity. They do claims, membership, a lot of ancillary services for us. It's software as a service. We pay them for transactions. So
Okay.
they take care of all that infrastructure for us. So there's a lot outside of what we control that our partners actually control directly.
Oh, I know, because you'd have to have an operation 5 or 6 times bigger.
Oh yeah, easily.
Than what you have.
Easily.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, when I first got to Horizon, one of the first things I was looking at, we needed to expand the data center, and we're running out of floor space, running out of power.
Yeah.
And we kind of stalled a little bit, and as we were analyzing it, and with machines getting smaller and smaller, and with us pushing more and more to partners, we ended up not having to do that. We've actually shrunk the size of the data center instead of grown it.
Yes. That's great.
Yeah, it was
great.
a good surprise. Rather than plunking down another $20 million for a new data center, it was certainly a good thing.
There's so many better ways to spend that extra $20 million,
That's right, like on digital technology.
Yes, yes. And I'm sure the CEO just said to you, well, you saved us all that money, Doug. Here you go.
A little more of a fight than that, but yeah.
I know. Well, you mentioned that it's a new CEO, but he's actually not new to you. He's
No.
been the chief operating officer, and so you've worked with him before.
Yes.
Because that relationship between the CIO and the CEO is pretty pivotal. And have you have you always reported to CEOs, or is he your first CEO experience?
So when I first came to the company, I reported to the previous CEO,
Yes.
Bob Moreno. Bob retired last year, at the end of last year. So for the first 4 or 5 years I was there, I reported to Bob.
Okay.
Kevin had come in to run our healthcare management area, which is all the networks negotiating with hospitals, things like that, our nurses. And when he was named COO, we did a little reorganization, and several of us ended up reporting to Kevin.
Okay.
So, but he and I worked very closely prior to that with some major projects that we had. Our new pharmacy benefit manager, we put in a new medical management platform. So I worked very close with him prior, and then worked for him as a COO. So when he took over as CEO, it was very natural transition. I continue to report to him now as the CEO.
Yeah. Well, and I don't usually run into CIOs who want to go back to, say, reporting to the chief financial officer. You know, not to say anything against CFOs. They do good work. They do. But it's a whole different mindset, isn't it?
It
when
is.
you talk with the conversations with CEOs.
I've been fortunate not to have ever worked for a CFO. I don't want to say that because my good friend Dave Huber is our CFO.
Yeah.
Nothing against Dave; he's a great guy, but they do have a different orientation. And
Yeah.
reporting to the CEO and sitting at the table with your peers, to me is incredibly invaluable. You just can't. You don't get the same level of understanding of the business if you don't.
Right.
So I think it's key for the CIO to report directly to the CEO.
Well, and it changes the level of your contribution if you're there bringing the ideas to them, the things that they never thought they always wanted.
Right.
So, and I tend to think that is one of the most valuable things CIOs can bring to the table, that depth of technology knowledge and understanding that, in a very non-threatening environment and way, they can point out, there may be something we can do with, I don't know, some AI tools or something, things that you wouldn't expect your chief operating officer to be all up to date on, that kind of thing.
Yep.
I'm just actually reminding myself that one of the things I forgot to tell our audience is that we are all on Twitter and doing this live. So if you have any questions for Doug, I have, of course, a list of questions, but yours might be even better. So please feel free to tweet in. We are at CIO Online, and if you are following us there, you can just tweet in a question, and that information will get to me, and we'll put Doug right on the spot for you. Okay.
Looking forward to that.
Yes. All right. So next, well, speaking of putting you on the spot, tell me what digital transformation, that's like our favorite buzzwords these days in the industry. And I always like to ask CIOs, what does that actually mean in your industry as a whole? Like for healthcare, is it just all about the mobility and the information on your handy iPhone or your Android? Or is it more about telemedicine? And so when you think about digital transformation in the healthcare industry, what is the kind of the big picture there?
I think it's a lot of that you just mentioned. Certainly, making use of people's smartphones. Everybody has one, and trying to engage our members, more actively in their healthcare management, their personal management of their healthcare, which is interesting when you look at what's going on in the retail, kind of the whole consumer world with Amazon or an Uber. And people's just kind of natural orientation to using that kind of technology. Healthcare has always been kind of a laggard in terms of technology in general, but now it's so pervasive. We have to be more out front or more upfront than we have been historically. So trying to use those tools to, again, engage people. And again, healthcare is not the kind of thing you're necessarily going to use every day. Hopefully not.
Yeah, I know.
And certainly there's some chronic conditions where we're using digital technology to really help improve people's lives. I think there's a huge benefit overall to doing that. But then more the routine stuff. Again, just picking a doctor, finding a specialist, maybe arranging transportation to get to the doctor's office, things like that. One of the things we're also doing is trying to integrate more with our provider partners and getting clinical information to our members. We can do that through the digital technology, allow them to access their healthcare records directly.
Yeah.
So that's one of the goals as well. So it's all about different types of healthcare requirements that people have is, again, as simple as finding a doctor to a much more complex management of somebody who has a diabetes, for instance.
Well, and that's on the kind of the patient consumer end of things. How about in that area of the industry where you're working with and managing hospitals, kind of the hospitals and doctors' practices, the B2B aspect? is it the same sorts of technologies that are as important for digital transformation there, or is it more about who is able to integrate well with your systems?
Probably a combination of both.
Okay.
So one of the things we've done is we've implemented a private health information exchange. We call it HealthSphere. We've actually kind of named it.
Okay.
And what it is kind of a repository of both claims information, so retrospective information on people's health, as well as clinical information. And it also integrates real-time information from electronic medical record systems at our provider partners. So we integrate directly with the large EMR vendors like a Cerner and Epic, Allscripts you mentioned, the company I used to work for. Where we're actually extracting clinical information directly from their electronic medical record systems. We're also getting some of the real-time information, something called an ADT, which is admission, discharge, and transfer. So kind of picture a primary care physician, your doctor, and all of a sudden you got admitted to the ER. We'll know immediately through these ADTs that you were admitted to the ER. We're able to pass that information directly to your primary care physician, who may not have otherwise known that you were admitted to the ER, and they may want to intervene. They may know that you have a history of some condition that they would want the ER to know before they start treating you.
So it pulls them into the loop.
It pulls them into the loop.
Much quicker.
Much more quick. Because typically today they communicate using faxes or phone calls.
Or phones, or 3 layers of people on the phone before you get to them.
Exactly. And this goes directly to clinician kind of thing.
Yeah. How are doctors adapting to that? Because as they're not the most eager people to. I know every time I go to see my doctor, and they're doing there's the nurse you meet ahead of time, and they sit there and they're putting information in and they're complaining the whole time about how lousy the system is, how it doesn't work, and all this other stuff. And then the doctor comes in and they complain about the technology. This is just my my world of one here, where I've noticed that everybody seems to gripe about it, and it could be there on an older version of an electronic health record, but because those never really caught on.
Right.
But how is that transition going, that mental, cultural shift with doctors?
Well, it's still a struggle.
Okay.
Doctors want to treat patients. That's what they went to med school for, and it's very natural. And they spend a lot of time documenting, unfortunately. These EMRs require time. There's several startup companies that try to address this, the use of scribes. So somebody's actually sitting side by side with a doctor, basically taking notes, so the doctor doesn't have to. One of our board members is a physician, and she mentioned that she's up to 10 o'clock every night just documenting. After she sees patients all day long, she goes back home and just sits at her computer and documents records all night long. It's a struggle.
Yeah.
So we got to find a better way of doing that.
Yeah.
And you think about some of the new technologies, voice-enabled technologies.
I'm thinking about voice recognition in this. If they could just think out loud and something was capturing all that information, that feels like something that's available today.
Yeah, and people are working on that. And we've been working on a little bit in terms of the insurance side of it, just basic stuff on FAQs and things like that, using Alexa or Siri to talk to. But voice enablement is just growing like crazy, and they say in 10 years, you look at the Gartner reports, voice apps have just skyrocketed in the last couple of years. It's amazing. And so probably another 10 years, keyboards will go away, and our primary means of talking to computers or iPads or your phone are going to be your voice.
And all those years I've put in becoming a lightning fast typist truly won't matter.
I got a C in typing in high school, but I've gotten better since.
Let's talk a little bit about the major initiatives you have underway. We already mentioned one of them, HealthSphere.
HealthSphere, yes.
And that is not fully rolled out, but it is partly rolled out. So talk about where you are in that. And CIOs love to talk about how it's a journey, not a destination. And I get impatient with that just on a personal level. I'm like, but I want to know the destination. I feel like that passenger in the car. When are we going to get there? So tell me about HealthSphere and when are we going to get there?
So we're in our second year of HealthSphere. We have one partner completely integrated, another one just about to go. We have 7 key partners that we're integrating directly to their EMRs.
Wow.
And we call them our Omnia Alliance partners. And you mentioned earlier kind of the change from fee for service to fee for value.
Yes.
They're all value-based kind of arrangements with these organizations. HealthSphere supports that, again, because of the information that's resident there. But like anything else, you're competing with priorities. We're dealing with, my counterparts, CIOs at these large hospital systems. They've got EMR upgrades. They've got, a million other things, financial, ERP systems they have to worry about. So it's kind of getting in queue and working with them to make sure that it's a priority for them as well. Our hope is those 7 partners will be completed by probably Q1, Q2 of next year, all fully integrated. We also have about 50 to 100, we call them non-integrated partners, access to the same information, but not through direct integration with their EMRs. So we'll kind of skin the cat a couple different ways. That's one of them. We have a provider portal partner called Navinet, and they can access it through that provider portal that gives them other information as well. One of the things I should mention is that what this creates, when you get the clinical information, the claims information, we create something called a longitudinal patient record.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that because you mentioned it when I talked to you earlier, and when I thought about it, I didn't really understand what it was.
It's basically your entire medical history.
It's the real deal.
It's the real deal. For as much information as we, in fact, have.
Because it's multiple sources. It's your doctor. It's your health insurer.
Right.
It's your CVS Minute Clinic.
It could be all the prescription information, lab results. So we're integrated with lab partners.
Wow.
Just about anything that you have. And we create that one record that is kind of, again, back to the kind of single source of truth for you as an individual.
Yeah.
And that's accessible from all these different, whether
your
it's a
life
provider,
in medicine.
Your life in history.
Yeah.
And maybe EHR will electronic health records, personal health records will catch on at some point again. They tried it. We tried it.
Dubious, isn't it? There's something like a 4 or 5% penetration throughout the entire.
The adoption rate is very low. Yeah.
And when things have gone on for 10, 20 years, and they just that feels to me like those endless IT projects that everybody comes to hate.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and now that we're in an agile world where we want to turn things around quickly and show real results for the consumers and the patients.
You would think, though, the example I always use is like immunization for kids. So you think a parent.
Yeah.
You're not going to remember when they had the last shots for whatever. And if you had that available on your app, wouldn't that be convenient and easy,
fabulous,
rather than trying to call your doctor's office and find out when was the last.
I can remember having it on a little fold-out card that I kept in my wallet.
I remember my mother had those.
For the first 5 years of my children's lives, I knew exactly. I could look it up.
Yeah.
But if I lost the wallet, I'd be in a whole lot of trouble around that. Yeah. Now, one of the things you mentioned. And so when we're talking about HealthSphere, this is a cloud-based platform, and you mentioned Orion Health. Is that the provider of the platform?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah. So
all right.
So it runs on Amazon Web, AWS.
Okay.
Orion Health is a company based out of New Zealand. And they provide health information exchanges globally for multiple countries. And as you know, outside of the U.S., there's a lot of national health care. So they're the go-to platform for a lot of countries out there for that.
Right. Okay. Well, one of the things I wanted to delve into a little bit more is the business background that you have. Because when we talked about how much are you business versus tech, you said about 70-30.
Yeah.
And your background and your own training, you came in essentially through business pathways rather than a computer science degree or an engineering. Talk about from the business side of things, how does that enable you to do a good job as a CIO?
It's I think it gives a little different perspective. I joke with my sales guy and tell him that I'm not really a technical guy. My kind of dirty little secret is I really am a business guy. And he says, I know that. That's why I like you. But I went to.
And again, that was a sales guy.
He's a sales guy, exactly. So take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But no, I went to school and for a business degree and also human development.
Right.
Interestingly enough, I thought about going into nonprofit management back then. And now I'm working for a not-for-profit company towards the end of my career. So it's kind of interesting turn of events.
You had a bent toward mission-based.
I guess.
You like having a mission. Yeah.
But so and back then it was before the Mac was invented, before Apple was a company, before MS-DOS was written by Bill Gates.
Wow.
We didn't have the computer science degrees didn't exist back then. We certainly had IS classes.
There was Radio Shack and people playing on the weekends.
That's right. That's about it. But I think because of that, it gives me a little different perspective on IT, coming more from a business side as opposed to a technology side.
Yeah.
And having worked for several startup companies, kind of on the senior leadership team there. One company we took public in '96 here in Boston. that gave me a continued sense of the business side of things. And at Allscripts, for instance, I ran a hosting business. It was technology, but it was running the business. I had a P&L responsibility. So again, it gives me, I think, a different look at the business overall and what it means and how technology fits into that business picture.
Yeah. Well, technology organizations often get sidelined by their by the enterprise itself as a cost center.
Yes.
And being a cost center is like the worst thing you can be in the world. And I can understand this because in the publishing business, the editorial operation is a cost center.
Yep.
Because we're not we're generating the material that is used to drive the advertising, sure. But still, you feel like a vital function that is being sort of sidelined and overlooked. Do you see that changing eventually? I mean, IT is never going to be a big profit generator. There's going to be great stuff that comes out of IT that goes on to make the company loads of money. But it's all that how valued it is or not. And I feel like that's changing in healthcare.
I think so. I mean, again, we talked about kind of the digital platform and where things are going. As things evolve, this whole fee-for-service to fee-for-value things evolve, the risk that we manage today is going to be pushed out to these provider partners. So hospital systems are going to start assuming risk themselves.
Okay.
So we have to think about, what is our value in this whole kind of healthcare ecosystem if they're assuming the risk, and what can we provide? And it's through things like technology. It's through the kind of the integration that I was talking about with HealthSphere. It's through providing digital tools and capabilities. It's through analytics. That's a big piece of it, data and analytics, that we can provide insights for our hospital partners to operate more effectively. That's where we see the value ultimately being.
Well, and that's way beyond being a cost center. That's being a provider. Of data and information and services.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yep. What is your setup for data analytics, big data, and data governance and that sort of thing? I understand that analytics is not a function that is specifically part of your IT organization.
Right.
How does it work at Horizon?
Well, we have a lot of kind of virtual organizations, one being analytics. So we're very closely with that team. Mostly healthcare economists. So it kind of makes sense that they sit in our healthcare management area where they're very close to the business. But what we're providing in IT is providing the data governance function. So making sure that data is handled appropriately, that it's being managed correctly. We have a virtual team that's managed by one of the folks who reports to our CTO. Yeah. And she takes really kind of the responsibility for the company for doing that. We also have our own kind of analytics platform. We called it our analytics transformation several years ago. I'll call it stage 1 of our transformation. Okay. Stage 2, we're working with another external company called Abacus Insights. And Abacus is developing a data management platform, and they'll be the base for our analytics platform going forward, assuming things go the way that we hope they will.
And do you see that function eventually becoming part of the IT organization, or does that not matter?
I don't think it really matters. To me, it's more about the relationships you have with people. Where it doesn't work is when the relationship doesn't work. We just hired a new chief analytics officer. He's hopefully starts in a couple of weeks.
Congratulations. They're not easy to find.
They're not easy to find at all. And I think we'll work very well together. Similarly, on the security side, I don't have the CISO reporting to me. It reports to our chief security officer. Okay. But again, we work very closely together, and it's a good relationship that we have, and that's what makes it work.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, I think CIOs do have to become what do the Brits call it? A minister without portfolio. The fact that you're acting more as an influencer and a Sherpa, a guide to all of these marvelous ways the enterprise can improve. And thinking about that on the changing role of the CIO, one of the things you mentioned was when the Affordable Care Act was first enacted, that really changed very dramatically where IT was positioned in kind of the firmament of healthcare. How did that change things? You've been 7 years now with Horizon. So what is the before and after picture in terms of this new approach that healthcare organizations are taking with consumers and what it meant for IT's relative standing?
Yeah, I think IT historically probably was more relegated to kind of the back office operations and health insurance, so processing claims, managing enrollment, paying bills. We still have to do all that. That's still critical. We can't not do that. If we don't, then we can't.
Table stakes.
It's table stakes. in order for us to do the stuff we need to do to be competitive, like the whole digital world, that stuff has to continue to be done well. And that's why we work, with partners like I mentioned, NASCO, who do a lot of that for us. They do a great job at it. I don't have to worry about the claim system going down overnight. It never does, because those guys are great at what they do. But it allowed me to focus on the things that the ACA required. It also included a lot more investment. So the good part of it, or the good news, was I got more money.
All right.
So that helped.
Nobody wants to kick that off the
nobody
table.
kicks that off.
Uh-huh.
And the company had way under invested in technology for some time. The company was posed to go public at one point, and that didn't happen. So they were kind of not spending a whole lot of capital at the time. So we had some technical debt, had to clean that up. Took a couple of years to get that cleaned up. Reorganized, as I mentioned, and then refocused. And the ACA helped refocus because we had no choice. It was a company priority. It was a mandate, a regulation. We're going to participate, so we had to do things in a certain way, and that helped propel us in the right direction.
Well, it was a bit of a perfect storm that you had an entire social and legal climate that was changing dramatically. You had a couple of years to get ready, but that went by fast.
Sure did.
And then also technology itself was changing while we're all ended up walking around with these supercomputers in our hands. So, that was that perfect storm. I really think it's had an impact on every single industry, but it's hard to think of any industry that gets closer to our well-being than healthcare.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
The differences in it and the expectations. Well, you also gave me an example from, you said, a recent board meeting. The technology discussion was the third item on the list. And that didn't used to happen on a regular basis.
No, it was one of our kind of primary disruptors as to what is happening. Certainly healthcare value, that pay-for-value is one of them.
Yes.
Kind of the whole member-centric thing, the digital platform we talked about. And the third was just technology overall, just innovation and where technology is going. It changes so fast. Another good reason we feel to deal with partners rather than doing a lot of it ourselves is the burden's on them to make sure they're keeping up with technology changes.
Yes. Well, and you mentioned, too, that the API technology, the fact that it's cloud-based, moving away from files to this real-time API database integration, is that what makes working with the partners such a different setup than it would have been a few years ago? Talk a little bit more about that, about the API technologies that are making such a difference.
Sure. Hopefully I won't, my CTO may correct me on a couple of these things afterwards. But being, again, I'm 70% business, 30% business.
We're waiting for tweets from our audience.
We'll see what he says if he's listening. But it allows, number one, kind of the real-time integration and also standards-based integration. And that helps quite a bit as opposed to file transfers and kind of more historical way of getting information back and forth. And again, being cloud-based, provisioning in that world is very quick. If we need more capacity, we can do it kind of on the fly in a very short time frame, minutes compared with days or weeks previously. So the entire thing provides a much better structure. And it's kind of I call it the glue that holds everything together. We've invested a lot in that API technology, but a lot of the partners, some of the kind of the legacy partners we have, aren't there yet. Okay. So, it'll be, again, a journey of several years before people will kind of get there. But once they do, it'll be much easier to kind of make changes moving forward because, again, it'll be all standard-based using the same type of interface.
Okay. Well, and I was thinking back to your IT organization and the way you've reskilled and have done a certain amount of restructuring. Are there entire departments or positions, senior level, senior leadership type positions that you've created in the last few years? Things that are the kind of the high water marks of like, here's how you can tell that the IT organization is different because now we have this function or we have that as a more important element.
Well, certainly data governance was one of those we talked about earlier. Okay. And we had done some of that, but creating a group specifically focused on that, I think was important. The whole kind of technology organization has started to kind of restructure itself into different areas, like the API piece is a big part of that now. And it starts with the architecture group, but then the actual delivery groups, they have to structure as well, organize similarly so they can support that new technology. And they've done that in all different areas.
Yeah. Well, another one of the interesting points you made about working with the board, that we said when we talk to the board about what members are expecting from us, you're not comparing yourselves to Aetna or Cigna or any of the other big healthcare providers, but with Google and Apple and other. How does that go? Are the board members nodding their heads and saying, "Oh yeah, that makes sense," or are they a little bit shocked that you're thinking about what Google is doing?
I think they're appropriately pleased. We're looking out there at who are the leaders in innovation and technology.
Right.
And again, healthcare will never be a Google or a Amazon. But to take some of what they're doing and apply it to healthcare is a way for us to kind of leverage that. And again, the pervasiveness of smartphones and how people shop and buy today. Try to apply that to what we do in healthcare and do it in a different way. And because that's the expectation. People, their expectations. I'll pull up my app and I'll get an Uber and I'll be here in a couple of minutes and I'm on my way to the airport.
Well, I was thinking the way the mortgage business has changed. Yeah. I mean, millennials expect to be able to finance their car on the app kind of from start to finish. And that has changed a lot of what the mortgage industry does. And the expectations for healthcare are not far behind that, are they?
No. And realty, the same thing, selling houses, buying and selling houses. And things like blockchain certainly are going to, at some point, enter in there. So you're putting, kind of this distributed world out there, distributed ledger world like Bitcoin. But think of a real estate transaction where you don't necessarily need that kind of middle person that's managing it all for you. You're going directly to your lawyer or to the bank or whoever it is to complete that transaction. Yeah.
Well, how do you personally stay kind of updated, and how do you explore the bleeding edge of technology, which, you may be more of a fast follower in terms of bringing it into Horizon, but it's definitely something that you have to have a flag in the ground somewhere on as a CIO. So how do you go about that?
Well, try to keep current and, certainly read stuff and go to conferences as much as I can to get the latest and greatest. I will tell you, I rely a lot on our Chief Technology Officer. He's great, and he really he and his team, our team of architects, are out there looking at what makes sense. As we look at our kind of overall architecture, I call it the logo slide. He's got this big slide of how all this stuff comes together. There's about a million logos on there of different technologies we're employing.
And then they all come down in a funnel.
They do all come down to a funnel.
And
hopefully all work and integrate well together. So.
Well, and we've mentioned a lot about the partnerships and how critical they are. With all the partnerships that you've done over your career, what to you makes a true partner versus a supplier or a vendor? What sort of requirements do you have for them if they're going to get to your inner circle?
It's interesting because I obviously get inundated with people asking to listen to their pitch about this, that, and the other thing, and it's kind of overwhelming sometimes.
But there may be thousands of them watching right now.
They probably are, and they're probably writing things down.
Good.
I'll just tell you a little aside. I had to change my phone number 3 times.
Because your cell phone number?
No, my office phone number.
Your office phone number.
I was getting so many calls all day long, and ended up changing. Of course, that annoys everybody in the company who no longer has my phone number. But it was like night and day. I think the third time I changed it, and virtually don't get any calls anymore. But everybody wants to be a partner. Everybody has the greatest idea. And healthcare right now, $3 trillion industry, everybody wants a piece of it.
Healthcare is so hot, and it wasn't 5-10 years ago.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's all changed.
It was very backwater.
Very much so. And so when we look at partners, it's really people who want kind of skin in the game on both sides. So Zipari, for instance, we're an investor in Zipari. So, and that's kind of how we do things. We'll look at investing in companies either directly or through some kind of warrant structure based on the agreements that we have. Similarly with NASCO, we're an owner company of NASCO. Pager is a company that provides kind of more the clinical side of things, think telemedicine, nurse chat, online nurse chat. We're an investor in that company as well. So that gives us some visibility into the company. And if they really want to do business with us, then we'll give them a little bit of money and we'll get a board seat and we'll be part of the equation. So it's kind of a two-way street to make it really work for us.
And you're essentially your running point on that for the CEO. You're involved. You're on the board Zipari and Pager and
NASCO.
And NASCO.
But actually, I'm not on the board of Pager. We have another individual on the board of Pager. But again, we work closely. And there's a couple other examples I didn't mention. A company called Coda.
Mm-hmm.
One of my peers, Alan Karp, is on the board of Coda. Again, another company that we invested in. So that's been our pattern.
Yeah.
We also invest in private equity funds, and that helps as well.
We don't tend to think of our healthcare insurance companies as investors.
No.
Out on the leading edge of technology with these companies.
Yeah. You'd be surprised, particularly in the Blues. There's a lot of Blues that do invest in smaller companies.
I was just going to ask that, whether you were all alone doing this or whether a lot of the big ones do it.
Well, one of the funds we're part of, there's actually something called the Blue Venture Fund. And the Blue Venture Fund will invest directly, and we're part of, we help fund that along with our other Blues.
Yeah.
But they'll go through, every year, 500 to 1,000 companies they'll evaluate. And they'll choose a handful to invest in as part of the fund. Yeah. So they also help us kind of navigate through all the different technology partners that are out there to help, hopefully, for us to select the best that are out there.
Is there any single, or maybe just one or two technologies that have particularly caught your eye in the last year? I mean, being as, when you think about it as an investor, is it the voice recognition technologies, or are there areas that you mentioned blockchain fleetingly?
Yep.
Everyone seems to be very interested in blockchain, but then when I probe and try to find someone with actual examples that maybe they'll come and talk on our stage about, they back right out. So.
When this board meeting that you mentioned we had recently, the one thing that they wanted to hear about was blockchain. And so we had a consultant come in.
The new buzzword. It's bigger than digital transformation at this point.
We had a great guy come in, did a luncheon talk all, at a level that a board member could understand. And I got up afterwards and said, "So would you like to hear more about blockchain?" And they said, no, thanks.
Never again, thanks.
Never again, thank you.
We're going to be capable at cocktail parties.
Exactly.
That's what we were after.
That's exactly right. But we are working, I mentioned NASCO before, we're working with NASCO along with another Blue, and the three companies are kind of invested in analyzing applications that might be good for a blockchain application, with the hope of maybe standing up a pilot first quarter of next year. That's our goal.
Okay.
Probably the use cases that makes the most sense is provider data. So demographic information on doctors, they move their locations all the time. They add an office. They don't stop going to an office. They are affiliated with one hospital or two hospitals. That changes. It changes all the time. Yeah, we've got 40,000 physicians just in New Jersey alone. So trying to keep up on top of 40,000 people with all the changes is not an easy task.
And that'll get your claim rejected by a lot of companies. They're like, we don't recognize that office address.
Exactly, or a benefit, that doctor isn't part of our benefit structure because we don't think that person's in the right place.
Yeah, all of a sudden they're out of network when they really are in network.
Exactly. Or vice versa.
And blockchain might solve that.
Yeah, it would put the burden on that distributed ledger. The burden's on them as that kind of endpoint to keep the data up in the current.
I can see how doctors would love that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Along with the AMR
more responsibilities
exactly.
for the data. So. Just what they are hoping to hear. Yeah. Well, and we were talking when you're in those board of directors meetings at Zipari. What is that like? How is that different for you than the things you do on with your own board at Horizon, or your day-to-day activities as a CIO? Is it more fun?
Well, obviously, you're being presented to as opposed to presenting to them. It's interesting. And I've been on several boards now. I was on the board of Navinet, the company I mentioned a while ago that was based here in Boston. We sold a couple of years ago. It's good. Well, it's kind of also you have to kind of separate your fiduciary hat from your customer hat, because in those cases I'm both a customer and a board member. So trying to keep that balance is important. But it also helps provide. It's very valuable to them because they look to you as what's important to you as a customer. And help kind of craft product strategy.
When we talk about this product to other enterprise CIOs, what are they going to ask?
Yeah, exactly. So you can really, hopefully, provides a lot of value to them as a result. But again, being a business guy and understanding, kind of the business side of the world is also fun from that standpoint, kind of running a business.
I guess.
Or helping to run a business.
Yeah, that's very cool. And you had mentioned Pager in passing. Tell us a little bit more about that. That interconnects online chats with people like nurses and that sort of thing. Is that rolled out? Is that in use now?
Yes, we rolled that out several months ago. We started with our employees. It's now being rolled out kind of across the board to our individual-based market. And by the end of the year, we should have access to Pager for about 1 million members. So pretty broad base. And Pager, as you said, different technology components. Interesting company. One of the founders was one of the 4 founders of Uber. So you think about logistics and what Uber's did with logistics, trying to do the same kind of thing in healthcare. So starting with something like a nurse chat, maybe evolving to a telemedicine, a virtual visit with a doctor, or even having to schedule an appointment with a facility to go in to have something done.
Yeah.
Example would be, somebody has a child who's running a fever, go online, do a chat with a nurse. What should I do? Based on what the nurse, they go through a triage process. They might say, well, you know what? We should really do a virtual visit with a physician. Let's set that up. They actually set that right up. The virtual visit occurs. The physician can make a decision as to whether or not they think a prescription is required. Maybe it's an ear infection or it seems like an ear infection.
Yeah.
Or they're not sure and they say, you know what, you really need to come in and go to an urgent care center. We can actually schedule that online through this app real time.
Wow.
That's the idea. Now, we're not there completely yet, not by any stretch, but we are there with one of our partners today. We can actually go through that whole process right to the physical facility.
Wow. Now, you mentioned your Omni Alliance partners. Those are not tech vendors of any sort. Those are hospitals.
Those are hospitals, yes.
Oh, all right.
Actually, 6 hospitals and one large multi-specialty practice.
Yeah. And do you tend to, what kind of governance or organizational structure do you have to set up for that? Are you on a group meeting with all the other CIOs, or are there different people in the mix? How does that work?
Interesting you ask that, because that's such a great question, and that we've set up actually executive committees with each of those partners.
Okay.
So because there's 7 of them, we can't all be in every meeting all the time. So we kind of split up the work.
Yeah.
So I have
That's
a couple
a lot of
that
Skyping.
I'm part of. Yeah, exactly. A lot of Skyping, a lot of talking. And the plan is to have things like a CIO council for all the partners exist. We haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
That's like phase 2. We're still kind of in that kind of first 2 years of making all this work. But that will definitely be a phase 2. And I'm talking to all the CIOs anyway about the HealthSphere integration. So it's not like we're not talking, because we have a lot of conversations about that.
You can do oh, by the way, here's something else that will benefit you.
Right, exactly.
You can be bringing benefits to them rather than more problems to solve.
Pager's one of the things that we are also talking to each of the partners about as well.
Yeah. Would you say, do you spend more of your time as a CIO on business activities versus technology, strategy, and decision making?
I would say yes now. Probably early on, the first several years, no.
Okay.
But in particularly as Kevin has kind of taken the leadership reins, more of an outward focus, absolutely. Trying to be more strategic with partners. Again, if it's provider partners like the large hospitals or partners in general, it could be strategy partners, it could be other business partners, and trying to get more involved in the business.
Yeah.
And then rely on folks like my CTO, our head of app development, who's one of our senior leaders, head of business solutions, those guys who work for me, and let them really manage more of the kind of technical decisions day to day, and hopefully get me out of the office occasionally to do more strategy work.
Get you out of the way. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Does Horizon take a specific approach to IT innovation with all initial caps? Like the place, like having an R&D lab. Some companies are more encouraging everyone to think innovatively and contribute their ideas, and sometimes there are portals for people to put in ideas, and they have internal contests and hackathons, that sort of thing. So usually companies take either a formal or an informal approach. How do you do it at Horizon?
I would say today it's informal.
Okay.
And there are other Blue Cross Blue Shield organizations that actually have formal innovation centers.
Yes.
In fact, Massachusetts, I think, just set one up.
Yep.
Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mass. We haven't gone there yet, but I think that's in the cards.
Okay.
And probably in the next year or so. We're kind of waiting for Kevin to really kind of get his strategy in place before we did that. But he's clearly a proponent of both innovation and agility. So I think we're definitely going to get there.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, we relied on our partners to help do that for us. Again, some of these smaller companies are extremely innovative. They're very agile. They can move on a dime. Because they're smaller and they don't have the same kind of overhead that some larger organizations do.
They don't have the governance needs you do. Right. Yeah. When you think about the most innovative things that IT has done in the last year or two, what floats up in your mind?
Well, it may not sound innovative to some technologists who are out there, but certainly the move to the cloud, the use of the API technology,
Okay.
and also the use of being healthcare. We have to be HIPAA compliant in everything we do.
Compliance, of course.
And that's a big deal in the cloud. We're actually partnered with another company called ClearData. I mentioned the private equity funds that we're part of. The Heritage Group is one of those. ClearData is one of their companies.
Okay.
So they provide a HIPAA-compliant infrastructure that sits on top of AWS, which AWS will only kind of give you the base level of HIPAA compliance at the very low levels of infrastructure. But you got a big gap between that and the application. ClearData will close that gap. So those kinds of things, to me, are kind of innovative work that we've done to get us innovative in terms of where healthcare can be innovated.
Right.
We're starting to look at some other things I mentioned earlier, like transportation. Actually, the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association has done some really good work working with Lyft on transportation, particularly like in the Medicaid population, where that becomes a problem, just getting people to the right place for care. Yeah. If we can facilitate that through integration with Lyft, then we can make that happen much more easily. So we're trying to do things like that as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, the other thing we mentioned, we were talking about emerging trends before, and I guess we were talking about AI and the kind of partners you're working with. You mentioned the work that IBM has done with Watson, and that always gets a lot of attention, the idea that cognitive computing will one day essentially be your doctor. Where do you see that on the spectrum? Does that still feel kind of science fiction-y to you, or are we closer to that than we realize?
No, I think we're pretty close. I mean, IBM for some time now, years, has been able to, through their Watson tools, kind of showcase its ability to make decisions more effectively than the human can. Humans can only retain so much information in their head. I would call it the hard drive. There's only so much space up there on your hard drive. But
our hard drives are wearing out.
Yeah, I know. The older we get,
we're also distracted. Yeah.
But so I think there's really something there, and I think it just has to be embraced by kind of the medical community to make it happen. But again, other companies like a pager, they're using AI underneath that to help make decisions, to create conversations that otherwise wouldn't have happened years ago, and kind of replace the human part of it for more of the routine kinds of things, and let the people make the hard decisions.
I know. Let people actually use their real people skills, which is more than answering phones and
or
organizing
looking
things.
up diagnosis codes in a big red book like they used to.
Yes. Only now they can't find them in their EHR, so they sit there complaining about them. Well, another thing we mentioned was Internet of Things and the Bluetooth-enabled devices. You'd mentioned that you're just starting on a concierge medicine approach with diabetes populations. Is that which one? Is that part of HealthSphere?
No. So it will feed into HealthSphere as a source of data, but it's a different kind of project and approach. Our chief medical officer is kind of working on that right now with our technical teams. And again, so Bluetooth-enabled devices, whether it's for weight management, Bluetooth scales, or if it's a heart condition where you're measuring heart rates, and they actually have, besides Bluetooth cuffs now, they're actually getting down to some of the watches ultimately be able to measure blood pressure and things like that. Taking that information and be able to more effectively manage a chronic condition like a diabetes, congestive heart failure using Bluetooth-enabled devices.
Well, I always, in the last few minutes of our interview, didn't I tell you 60 minutes goes flying
it does go
by? I know.
Nobody asked any questions, though.
I know. We didn't get a single question. Maybe next time. So far, the only one who has gotten a question was Cynthia Stoddard, the CIO at Adobe. Got a very good question about senior IT leadership, and we were also happy because finally our Twitter, they must just be too fascinated with what you're saying. But I'd like to wrap up talking a little bit about what you've learned about leadership over the years and kind of balancing those competing demands of the CIO role with your business working directly for the CEO, and then also with all your board work that you're doing with these emerging companies. What are some of the things you've learned for making sure that you don't exhaust your own internal resources and that you stay focused on being a good leader?
Yeah, it's a balance, no doubt. I was lucky when I was younger and first working. I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation, highly matrixed organization. I always say I kind of learned.
That's a neighbor of ours here. I live quite close to Maynard.
Worked in Maynard, but I kind of learned to lead and manage there, and because of that kind of flexibility in management, it's kind of helped me in later stages. And I try to bring that, whether it's through collaboration or teamwork or kind of walking the walk. You try to do that as best you can, and unfortunately, the kind of the more senior you get, the harder it is to do.
Yeah.
But I also think there's a cultural aspect with leadership, and you have to adapt yourself to the culture. Certainly, Horizon, when I first got there, much more structured, kind of hierarchical organization than I was used to, and I really had to change to adapt to that.
Okay.
But still try to bring kind of the innovative part of it to it as well. So I think, again, it's kind of a balance between all of that.
Well, I would think so, too, because when you're trying, because one of the things you had mentioned when we talked about this earlier is how important it is for you to be as transparent as possible. But that can mean an awful lot of communicating in a matrix organization.
Yep.
I would find myself after a while thinking, did I already tell this person that? So
it's a lot of communication. I think there's kind of a personal aspect to it, too, developing relationships with people and trust. Doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while, but I think that's important too.
Okay. I heard a boop and I thought maybe, did we get a question?
No.
All right.
Of course not.
We were hoping. You're going to have to give all your people back at Horizon a hard time, saying like one of you couldn't have tweeted in a question. Let me see. So the biggest words of wisdom you would have for other CIOs, whether they're healthcare industry or not. We've talked about trust and openness and transparency.
Well, certainly those things are paramount. But I think just kind of an openness to be flexible, to adapt to changing times, because certainly technology, the pace of technology change isn't slowing down anytime soon.
Right.
That's going to continue, and the change in the business world is just as crazy out there. When you do have the folks like Amazon and others, particularly in healthcare, they're starting to talk about getting into the industry. It's going to potentially be a game changer.
Yeah.
But that's only one industry. They can pretty much disrupt any industry they want to, based on their size and scale. So,
well, it's all disruption, isn't it?
It is.
It's a longer word, more syllables than the word change.
Right.
But of course, we do that a lot. With all of the business background you had, are you ever tempted to go back into more of a business role, or do you love being a CIO?
I love being a CIO, but I kind of get the best of both worlds in this job, again, because of what we talked about earlier, being part of that senior leadership team and being part of the decision-making process at Horizon. It's like I am in the business, in effect.
Yes. Well, and I think increasingly that will be. I've had almost all CIOs that I talk to have other significant responsibilities outside of IT, which is a good thing, because think how bored you all would get.
That's right. What else would we have to do?
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation, and I told you it would go by really quickly.
Very quickly.
So if you are joining us late and want to watch the full episode, and who would blame you? It was a marvelous conversation. You will be able to find it tomorrow, posted on CIO.com, and it will also be living on our Twitter feed at CIO Online for a little while longer. Now, the audio podcast of our conversation today will be available on iTunes and Google Play and SoundCloud. And I hope you will join us for our next episode, which will be Wednesday, August 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'll be joined by Rob Dravenstadt, who is the Senior Vice President and CIO of Dish Networks. Thank you very much for joining us today for CIO Leadership Live, and we hope to see you again soon.